Hello and welcome. I am the Letterhack, and with me now are two very special guests from everyone's favorite YouTube show about the environment and climate change, Environmental Coffee House. It's Sandy Scholes and Antonio Reed. Guys, how are
Hi,
you?
Matt. It is so great to be here. My name is Chalice. Just so,
Chalice.
yes,
Oh, see,
Chalice.
I
Just, it's
this
okay.
is the thing.
Nobody gets it right.
I
Nobody gets it
always
right.
ask people to pronounce their name before we go on, and I didn't. I don't know
It's
why.
okay because we were talking about everything else.
Well, this is also my second interview of the day. I'm premiering one tomorrow, so I already had one
Oh,
today, and so I guess I just feel burnt 2 in 1 day, and that's all it takes to
yeah.
burn me right.
Well, Matt, you got my name right. So,
Okay, great. Nice. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for being here. Say it for me one more time, Sandy. I like that name.
Sandy Chalice. Silent
Shellis.
O, Chalice. Like you go to
Very
the
nice.
beach, you come back shellless.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. I'll remember. Uh,
Yeah.
I really do appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about a a great topic, one that is something that we could talk about a lot, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
we'll cover it. Um, First of all, I normally start by asking my guests for their origin story, but in this case, I'll modify it a little bit. I'd like to begin by asking you both to tell viewers a bit about yourselves and your interest with issues related to the environment and your involvement with Environmental Coffee House. So I guess, Sandy, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, first, let me say hi to your chat. I can't see my chat, but hi, Looney Tunes. Thank you for everything.
Yeah.
And Courtney, and it's good to see you, Bella. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am Sandy Shellis, as you heard 3 times. And I started the channel in 2017 after I was with Real Progressives as a Bernie supporter. I had a Facebook page called Bernie Babes group, but actually, I am a medically retired human resources director from the State University of New York Buffalo Research Foundation. So, because I was in science already, and I have, the degrees in science, but not that kind, human resources science and psychology. We studied Great Lakes and science, but we studied the lakes, not necessarily climate. We studied pollution, but I got interested. When I retired, I moved out here to a homestead, which everybody that follows me knows I'm a big gardener. I prep, I feed with wood. I'm, like 2 steps to off grid. Um, but I decided to start my own channel because I wasn't, it wasn't fulfilling my needs at Real Progressive. So we started it. And from there, I just started to learn and learn. And then I hit upon um, Collapse Chronicles. And that's how I met Antonio and Jennifer. And we've all met. I've been out to Boulder to Jennifer's, and Antonio was at my home for a big party we had in 2018. And so we don't know Jim personally. Jim is our oceanographer. He's in Fairbanks. Nick is right now finishing his PhD, who is supposed to be with us. Nicholas Humphrey, he is doing a PhD in, I guess you could call it disaster management, but it's emergency management, which is really needed. And he's a meteorologist. So we just started doing shows, together, and we clicked. We have a team, it's a thing. So I love Antonio, and I'm so happy he's with me because he's got the brains. I might do the background and all, but ask Antonio anything about the IPCC. You got it. So,
Strength in
Tony,
numbers.
yeah, at that segue, there's my rant.
well, Sandy, I certainly do appreciate those words. And Mac, of course, thank you for having us here. So, for the audience, my name's Antonio Reed. I got introduced into this. My background, I graduated from college in 2017 with 3 degrees, two in history, history, intellectual history, phenomenology, history, the Africana study, the study of the African diaspora, and then political science with a focus on international relations and the comparative politics and Israeli Palestinian conflict. Um, so I really wasn't even that adjacent to climate change in terms of my academic study. But I went to school at Appalachian State University here in North Carolina, which is in the mountains, for people who may not know. And we typically get a climate that's similar to that of New York, kind of where Sandy Chalice lives up in Angelica. We get really robust summers, falls, winter, and spring. We look at 2, 3, even 4 or 5 feet of snow. Is not unusual for us during our winters. Well, now that is quite unusual for us, but it used to not.
Yeah. Right.
And when I was up on this mountain, what really, really, I always accepted climate change, kind of the Al Gore inconvenient truth view of climate change, which is kind of standard for people of our mold. And I was really woken up to what I would call crises in 2016, when in February, which is the depth of winter, we were experiencing near 80-degree days, which is near our summer maximum. Of course, this was during the El Nino year of 2016. And it really woke me up to realize that this climate crisis was not something for, we talk about our grandchildren, but this was something for us. This is something for us now. And so that is kind of what had me, catalyzed me to look out into the internet and look onto different independent medias. That's where I found Corrupt Chronicle, Sam, and then Sandy Chalice. I worked for a time with Stuart Scott when he was doing his TV Matters program, Climate Matters program at the Conference of Parties.
Famous guy.
So, and I did that for a little while, and also working in collaboration with Sandy Chalice, doing interviews with different climate professors in paleoclimatology and climatology and atmospheric sciences and things like that, just trying to elevate the conversation and awareness on the crisis that we're all now very much increasingly aware of.
Sandy, where'd you get the name Environmental Coffee House?
Okay. The guy I started with originally, I came over here, we called it Environment and Stuff. We didn't like it, Roger. And I just said, let's make it homey. Let's make it a coffee house. And, I am an environmentally oriented person. And so Environmental Coffee House it flowed, and that's how we got it.
It sounds like something, it sounds very familiar. Like when I first heard it, I was like, where have I heard that before? I guess nowhere. But it sounds like I should have, It's a good name. It's a great name. I wonder, are there, and either of you can answer this, are there any aspects of your use of online media in general, or specifically, that you wish were better or could be improved? Like in your experience doing YouTube shows, is there like one thing that you're like, this stupid thing always persists, I wish somebody would figure it out, or anything? It could be the social media aspect, or advertising your show, or technical.
Okay.
It could be anything.
Tony, you want to go first?
Yeah, I have a smaller one, and I think that probably Sandy's answer is going to be a little bit more dynamic and substantive. An issue that I have, which is kind of macro contextual, is the algorithms, is the bias. When I first got on to YouTube, well, basically when it came out, I grew up with YouTube. I'm 30 years old. So YouTube came out, in 2005. I was in 5th grade. And it was a very different YouTube in the early experience from what I'm getting today. Today, it's very easy to get segregated in certain type of thought bubbles and media expression. So that worries me quite a bit, given all of the type of conspiracies and anti-truth or alternative truth realities that have kind of sprung up in the political landscape over the last decade or decade and a half or so.
Good answer. What about you, Sandy?
Well, I don't know. I would suppose it's trying to get out there. I'm not. Marketing is a lot of work. When we stream on Twitter, Facebook is where we started. That's where I first started streaming. I didn't even know what live streaming was. I mean, I was a professional. I was working, I didn't have time to watch live streams, so I suppose it was learning the technical, but the a problem, just getting out there, just overcoming. Okay, I will say it. A little bit of age bias. I'm older female. And so it is not as easy for us to be out here talking about what we're talking about. People, so I guess that's part of it. And I don't know. I don't have that many complaints. I mean, I've
That's
learned a lot.
yeah, okay. So that's the thing. For me, it's trial and error. There is no like YouTube will try and give you some guidance, but there's no like book on how to
No.
do it. And that is like um I rely heavily on Sandy Lovis, Left of the Box.
That's great.
I will get them on Skype and be like, "Can you help me test my audio? I have this is a glitch I have. I don't know what it
Hmm.
is." And then we'll just sit there for like an hour trying to figure it out while chatting. But I really and there's just so many different ways you could go about it. No matter what you do, you're jumping in the water and learning to swim. So anyway, I think that it really does say a lot about one's character to live stream, especially if
Oh,
if
yeah.
you figure it out to a degree where you're even a little successful. You have overcome a lot of mountains. You're pioneering
Mhm.
every day, and anyway. So
I've
it's
used a lot
admirable
of
thing.
different things. I mean, I started with nothing on Facebook, and then I got the software Be Live. Remember that, Antonio? Be Live
I
when I
do.
first
Oh
started
yeah.
that. So we had Be Live for Facebook, and I didn't use the YouTube page, but to stick up the stuff I was doing on Facebook.
Hmm.
But I found moving to YouTube was much better. And then I went to Ecamm Live. So I've been learning and updating. And I mean, last year I had a crappy laptop and I had to put a block of ice under it and a fan on it so it wouldn't
Oh
overheat because I'm running
Oh
wow.
the show.
yeah.
Then we did a fundraiser and people were so beautiful. And I got the M1 little Mac Mini so I can run the show. So I guess it's those kinds of things. It's not having, overcoming the hurdles as you learn. I mean, it's taken me 7 years to get where I am.
If you think about it,
Yeah.
people go to college for broadcasting, and we're just kind of like trying to figure it out from home. So it is a lot of courage involved. Um, do you all get mostly positive feedback, or I don't want to say negative, but I imagine like a lot of your comments are folks who are generally full of anxiety, not doom and gloom, but like
Oh,
because you're covering a topic that's pretty scary, right? And so
they
I
call us
wonder,
doomers.
well, I wonder, like, I ask all my guests who are in media to a degree, do you get positive feedback?
I
Like
get
that
a
you're
lot of
helpful in
positive
easing
feedback.
their
I
anxiety.
I want to
We
say
do.
yes.
We do.
One of the experiences that I had directly related to a lot of the broadcasting that we do at the Environmental Coffee House is that someone here in Winston Salem reached out to me, and we started a climate support group that has almost 12 members now.
That's great.
And that was, and 12 members sounds small, but, also remember, we're in Winston-Salem, North Carolina here in the South. People are busy and they go about their lives. And also, like you say, the topic that we're talking about is very substantive and very heavy. And so even to get people who meet up on a Wednesday, or excuse me, a Thursday at 5 p.m. regularly to talk an hour about these things,
Mhm.
because they don't have those type of familial relationships in their life, people that they feel comfortable with, to talk about some of these more deeper concerning aspects of the climate crisis. And so I think in that sense, we profoundly have touched people, if I might say, their spirits. And so I think building programs like that, uh, I would consider that very positive feedback.
And we
That's
have a
great.
very loyal following of I have to say, most everybody is just beautiful. And we don't have trolls very often. And we have wonderful moderators. Um, the channel is small because we don't get out, and I do what I can, but we do have amazing people in the community. And it's not just my channel, it's in Antonio's channel in general. It's other channels, with other people that are talking about the same things. We don't compete. We're not competing.
Yeah.
We're all educating. We are in here because this is the biggest issue of our lives.
It's the planet. All right, let's get into it.
All right.
So I thought we would kick this off by discussing long-term trends in climate. Uh, you guys are very knowledgeable, obviously. That's what we've been talking about on this topic. And a lot of the viewers are. But I always kind of gear these things when I do them. I gear these specific topic discussions toward the basics if I can, just to get us off the ground, to help anyone coming along who might not be as knowledgeable on the topic as the rest of us. Um, not that I am. I don't want to give anybody, like, I'm pro environment, right? Like, believe me, but I am not the expert that you guys are. So I'm going to be relying on you a lot. But let me kick this off. I want to bring up a slide now, and I also want to remind everyone there are a lot of links in the description of this podcast, and I'll be updating with more links after we're off air tonight. So be sure to check that out. I put a lot of references on the community tab and social media over the weekend for a little bit of reading and prep, a bibliography of sorts for the resource material that we're referencing tonight. So we're citing sources here, folks. And so I want to start. I know some of this may be difficult to read, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but like I said, you can always click on the description. So check this out. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration maps, like literally maps, temperature and precipitation. And if, they have very informative, easy to read infographics. This is what I do for a living. Make things digestible and accessible, right? And so I love it. And so right away, as soon as I started, messing around on this website, I was like, hey, I understand what they're saying. Not all of it. Some of the charts are a little intense, but you learn as you go. And so they map out temperature and precipitation, like I said. Here is a look at January 2023. So from this year, it was the 7th warmest January for the globe in the NOAA's 174-year record. January 2023 marked the 47th consecutive January and the 527th consecutive month with global temperatures at least nominally above the 20th century average. Moving on to precipitation. January 2023 observed above average precipitation across parts of northeastern and inland eastern U.S., the central and southern coasts of the western U.S., Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Eastern Oceania. In the U.S., 9 back-to-back atmospheric rivers pummeled California with heavy rain and snow, which brought a total of 32 trillion gallons of precipitation to the state this January. Okay, now, those are some long-term trends, right? I mean, we're talking about like hundreds of years of trending, right? Upward. And I want to talk about the variance, because it's not a straight line upward, but we'll get there. And why that shouldn't matter. It's still, it always ends up higher than it should. But I want to ask you, are temperature and precipitation actually the top 2 most obvious long-term trends in climate? Are they related? What am I not getting when I'm looking at the most basic, what I think is the most basic?
Go ahead,
So,
Antonio.
yeah, absolutely. So there's a direct relationship, right, between precipitation, or might I say the hydrological cycle, and the warming of the planet. So for planet Earth, we call it Earth, although 75% of its surface area is water. Each degree Celsius above our baseline, the baseline that we're talking about here is 1880. So that's what we're going to call the pre-industrial baseline. That's not the true pre-industrial baseline, but that's the IPCC kind of accepted baseline. So every degree Celsius, which is roughly 1.8 degree Fahrenheit, temperature increase we see on the global average, what we can expect is between 5 to 7% increase in the ability for the atmosphere to hold more water. Okay. So as the temperature goes up, and this will happen on a global average, but this will also happen in regional climates as well. So regional climates might also experience episodes of increased heat over a period of time, increasing the moisture in the atmosphere. But also, what we're seeing is that because the jet stream is becoming increasingly anomalous, where these weather patterns end up, where this water ends up, isn't necessarily synonymous with necessarily the place that's producing the heat. Um, and so you might have a situation where you have a trough in the jet stream that's causing extreme warmth from, let's say, a place like Texas. But then you might get more milder temperatures in southeastern China and get these absolute massive deluges and rain cycles, or what you just noted in California with these atmospheric rivers that are just dumping absolutely massive amounts of water. And then we're also seeing this impact storm systems as well. We're starting to see this impact cyclones. We're starting to see this impact hurricanes. Then we're also starting to see this impact local weather anomalies as well. So
Yeah.
2017 with Hurricane Harvey was a situation where we had a confluence of things really emerge. Um, some of those elements was the fact that we are living in a world that's about 1.2 degrees Celsius, 1.3 degrees Celsius above our 1880 baseline. Um,
Yep.
and we're also seeing a weakening jet stream. And those elements lined up perfectly for Hurricane Harvey to stall over the state of Texas for 5 days and drop 5 feet of water, really causing absolutely historic flooding in the United States and cost the state of Texas over $200 billion in disaster. So there's absolutely a link between the increase in global average temperature and the amount of water the atmosphere can hold at any one time.
And we're seeing this now catching up. We're seeing this in China, Greece, the United States, Vermont. We're seeing
Mm-hmm.
these, and you can know, we could say anomalies, which is really statistical the way it's measured, but it's totally different processes. I mean, we are not meteorologists. We would have loved to have our um, Nick here, but everybody here has to see the things that are
Yeah.
happening because we're
This
on social media, so we can.
yeah. I mean, it should be noted you guys work with a legit meteorologist at Environmental Coffee House. You're not
Mhm.
just, making this up off the cuff, right? It's
No, and
like
we have an oceanographer in Fairbanks,
yeah.
Jim Massa, Science Talk with Jim Massa channel. I mean, Jim and Antonio do great shows together. This is real science based on all of the publications that come out in all of the journals that are associated with what, what's being studied.
Yeah, and so like you said, it's kind of like how could one deny that this is
Yeah.
happening, right? But they do. And so my next question is um who benefits from climate denial, right? Because I want to know how and why. Where did those talking points come from? Are they talking points? Where do they come from? And why do they do it?
Well, I'm going to start quickly with
Yeah.
this one. Okay, I'll talk about the money part, the fossil fuel industry and the money behind it and the owners, the Koch brothers, I'm sure everybody knows those names, and how they fund online specifically now the Heartland Institute, who then money comes from other places, but they are a disinformation think tank for science, and the scientists they get are usually corporate fossil fuel scientists, some academics, not too many, and they will fuel misinformation by cherry picking data,
No pun
by
intended, fueling this
yeah,
information.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And so I love what I try to debunk them, but I really like watching the debunkers, you know. And I mean, they're so pathetic. They have a website called, I think it's called is it Real Climate? And it's everything in it is by every denier that's out there. You know, their names are like Steve Malloy, Bjorn Lomberg, Judith Curry, Willie Soon. These are all the names. And if you go to a publication called Desmog Blog, you can find mostly all of them because that's their purpose. Desmog Blog is a really good publication for looking if you feel uncomfortable with a name, you know. But it's all about money, and it's all about facilitating the status quo, business as usual, and confusing people.
Yeah, because it's not like everyday people on the street are coming up with these arguments and this logic on their own. They heard it from somewhere. See a storm like that sitting over Texas for 5 days and start saying, well, it's not real, and then using like the standard talking points that you get from the fossil fuel industry, right? It's just they overheard it and they
Right.
adopted it on their own.
Well, it got
Um,
politicized.
Right.
there it is,
Antonio, you
right?
want to talk a little bit about what happened there with Michael Mann and the hockey stick?
Well, right, because that leads a good segue into the politicalization of climate change, right?
Of
So this
science.
story in the United States really starts at the late Carter administration. This is happening really in the mid to late 1970s. We start to see really a document that's published called the Lewis Powell Memorandum, and this is the business faction of American society. And they get together realizing the consequences of the preceding decade, the 1960s, and what's called the excess of democracy that occurred during that time. We saw, of course, movements in civil rights. We saw women's rights. We saw the issue of abortion. We saw education, access to housing, environmental issues during this time, the passage of the Clean Air and Water Act. Business was in real trouble in the United States, losing control of the national agenda. And so it was necessary for business to take control of the national agenda to preserve, of course, their profits and their power. And one way that the corporate industrial machine in the United States started to recognize that it needed to do this um, was through, well, a device that, Dr. Noam Chomsky has eliminated to us, manufacturing of consent. That we started seeing a consolidation of these media giants. These media giants oftentimes get money donations and through advertisements straight from the industries themselves, typically are not very critical. Oftentimes media, I remember CNN putting on people like Mark Morano to talk to people like Bill Nye the Science Guy. It's not that Anderson Cooper or Wolf Blitzer don't know any better, but that is exactly how the corporate scheme tries to set up a pretense, a facade of tackling this issue, but it's actually meant to create more confusion, right? Mark Morano isn't a scientist. He doesn't have a scientific background. He doesn't actually have any authority to speak on these issues. In fact, he comes from the industry itself. So we see that that's one facet of this attack, that the corporate apparatus attacks the media, the information machine in the United States. But we also see that the corporate apparatus becomes hyper political. It's no longer possible for business to stay out of politics. Now it's time to get actively involved in politics, not just donating to your favorite or your preferred politician, but creating, like what Sandy said, this network of think tanks so that they could create let's say, a sub deep state specifically to bring forth their agenda when they capture the public and civic institutions. And of course, that is another prong of what we saw, particularly in the 1990s. American economists actually essentially stopped talking about this issue after the 1990s. We started getting ridiculous things from Francis Fukuyama about the end of history. And so we stopped talking about predatory capture of our civic agencies. Of course, which was a very powerful move by the industry to really defang any type of regulatory apparatus that might consequently slow down or reduce their ability to produce products and therefore profit. And then the last dimension is the international dimension. That, of course, in the United States, domestically, the corporations could win. They saw that was possible. They got their guy in office, Ronald Reagan. They had effectively taken over both parties with the introduction of Bill Clinton as the neoliberal Democrat. And so they had won the political scene in the United States, but there was pressure building up elsewhere. And so, namely the Conference of Parties, the United Nations. The issue of climate change catastrophe was starting to come ahead. And so we had our 95 Rio conference where we wanted to lay a lot of the pivotal groundwork on some type of international agreement on climate change. But of course, that stood directly in the way of, the business agenda here in the United States. And ultimately, this would result in the failure of the Kyoto protocols, which would have been really demonstrable in terms of where we are today in our climate legacy.
So, powerful economic interests, the fossil fuel industry has funded disinformation campaigns for years to create doubt in climate change so they can keep making cash. And like always, they buy off politicians to weaken policy, right? And then
Yes.
the policy that could help the situation, right? And so there
And
are answers out there we're not even getting around to because of the disinformation.
and even went as far as Republican marketing strategist taking the word global warming and saying,
Right.
nope, we cannot use it. And that was Frank Luntz. And Frank Luntz is still alive. And climate change, it sounds so much less fearful and scary when I don't use it anymore because it's global warming and that's what's happening. And I'm not using Luntz's work anymore.
Yeah, it makes me want to go back and change the title.
Oh, that's
Okay,
okay.
so
I'm just starting to
No,
tell
I got you.
everybody to do that.
Well, but you're right though. And so should we move off that? Do you have anything
Well,
else
I
to
want
say
to
about
highlight
that?
it.
Please.
There's two strands of what I call a corporate or business-oriented denial.
Okay.
So the first strand is that very direct, provocative strand. It's very reactionary, but it's causal. It's denying the cause of climate change. The second strand that I'm starting to notice happening in the United States is denying its application, its implication to our lives, what it ultimately means. And what I mean by that is look at what happens with development, right? So we've gotten sea level rise projections from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They're absolutely devastating. A projection of 8 feet of sea level rise. And people just have to really understand what that means. A real change in the way that we look at global coastlines is coming in our century.
And it's happening now. I mean, we
But
have.
but the denial here is
Right.
if you look at coastlines around the United States, around the world, what's happening to them? They're building them up. And there's a clash, right? And we're starting to see that in places like Florida, where insurance industries are saying, well, we don't know. And insurance industry is a really good measure of risk, right? Because that's what their entire pool is about. And so what they're saying is the insurance industries are saying that certain areas are becoming increasingly problematic. In fact, they're becoming uninsurable.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see this in Florida. We're starting to see this in states like California on the issue of wildfires. And that is going to be the first major level of what I call awakening or business oriented awakening. So there's a denial of the cause by business, there's a denial of the impacts by business, but there's an awakening to how is making their business models really inoperable. The threat of that doing of running amok in terms of risk management.
Mm-hmm.
It's so obvious a problem. Okay. How about this talking point? Climate change is natural. What are you going to do? No, this is perfectly normal, right?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? How do you even, how do you argue that?
We both have our own. Do you want to go first, Tony?
No, Sandy, you go this
Okay,
time and out.
mine is quickly.
You guys are so prepared. This is
Well,
amazing.
people
Thank you.
say, the climate always changes. I have people like that in my family, and I just say, absolutely, the climate does always change for geographical time, hundreds of thousands of years. But enter human beings, and the climate is warming. So I say global warming is happening. I'm giving them climate change and saying, yes, it's happening. But now you're seeing the temperatures, it's global warming. And I just try, to get through to these brains. I have these people I talk.
Isn't that what they call a steelman argument, where you take their
Yeah.
point, reinforce it, and then improve upon it, right?
Yeah,
That's
there you
smart.
go.
Smart
Try to get
argument.
them involved in it and feel like, well, yeah, maybe.
So you are
Yeah,
right. It is
does.
changing. Also,
Well, it does.
warming.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And that's
Yeah,
easy
and
enough.
that's kind of the short in and out of it, right? If somebody says, well, climate change is natural. Well, so are asteroid impacts. But
Oh my
that
God.
is not necessarily something that you would want to happen.
Yeah.
You would try to do your best to occur. So just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's beneficial for you.
Right.
And so
Right.
getting people to understand that, cancers are natural. Okay. But if you were stricken with cancer, you'd do all that you can to try to get rid of it, to avert
Right.
catastrophe.
Yeah. I think also it's worth noting that humans are making it worse. So whatever is natural, when humans come along, we're contributing to it in a negative way. And that impact is worsening the situation. And so I think that's where people stop looking. Maybe it's ego. I don't know. Maybe it's the human condition. Maybe it's these talking points, just putting up a wall. People stop looking at it in terms of, oh yeah, we're a factor in this. And
Well, it's hard for a lot of people because they're conditioned. It's like Antonio was saying, manufactured consent. They're conditioned
Yeah.
to not think it's humans, and then there's the religion factor. Oh my God, it's huge that it could never be humans, and everything on the earth was put here for our consumption and enjoyment in certain religious communities. So that's a big issue for me. And it's hard. I live in an Amish area, and they know something's going on. They don't have any kind of social media. They ride horses and buggies here. I mean, it's really rural where I live. They do know something's going on, but they know because of the farming.
Mhm.
And I go over and I go see Harvey, and I say, well, what's going on this year? How is it? And it's, they understand. But they can't, what are they going to do about it? They're just going to try. They'll be the ones to acclimate. We won't. They don't
Yeah.
have denial. They're just, because they don't have social media. It's really funny. It's really wild, actually, to talk to people like that. You don't get to talk to people that don't have access to social media very often. Tony?
Yeah, I think a lot of people do struggle to think about their place in all of this. And a lot of times that thought process in of itself can cause people to look elsewhere. So I don't know. I think you summed it up pretty well.
so earlier you guys were talking about the IPCC, which is the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Um, don't you love how, like, in the media, and I'm not accusing anybody of this, but in the media, people just say GOP. Does
Oh,
everyone know what that means? It drives me nuts because it's
oh,
like,
COP.
no, GOP, Grand Old Party for the
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Republicans,
for them. Oh, I
or
see.
people
You're
just
talking
throw
about
these
acronyms.
around, and it's
Yeah.
like, could
Yeah.
somebody at least once at the beginning of the story say what it means? I always make a
What
point
the
of saying it.
IPCC means or the
Like,
COP means, and
I always ask if people know what JPEG stands for.
yeah,
Like,
because
you know
usually
when to
you're
use it and what it is, but do you know what it stands for? No, it doesn't really matter. But I like to know, you know.
well, you're an
It
artist.
it stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group, by the way, which is totally meaningless now that you know, right? But anyway, um, so I bring up the IPCC because another talking point you always hear is scientists don't agree that it's real. None of the scientists agree.
Oh gosh.
Take it away.
Well, let me respond to that. First of all, let
Yeah.
me still man the argument. It is absolutely correct that the scientists don't agree, but what they don't agree on typically is to the extent the impacts of climate change, not that it's happening. In fact, 95%, not of scientists themselves, which, you know, scientist is a very general term. So the type of scientist that we're interested here is climatologists. So we're not particularly interested in knowing what a astrophysicists might think on this issue, but we're talking about published studies in climatological journals or relevant journals. So 95% of climatological and paleoclimatological studies agree that what we are experiencing is a human-induced episode of climate change caused by global warming. Okay, and I just want to focus on those terminologies real quick because they might sound a little confusing to people. And Sandy already hinted around to this. So climate change is again a general term. Okay. It just refers to a change in your climate. It's not directional. It doesn't necessarily imply that your climate is warming or that it's cooling. Of course, the climate, the planet Earth is 4.2 billion years old. So there's a whole history. That's what we call paleoclimatology. There's a whole history of climates on Earth. And the way that we might describe them is an ice age or in a glacial or a warming period or a hot house. So there's different terms that we can associate with different climate changes, or what I like to call different episodes of climate change. The current episode is human-induced or anthropogenic. And that's agreed upon, obviously, by the IPCC, which, of course, we got their first seminal statement in 1990 when they released their AR1. And that AR1 actually was meant to look at this issue. First, is climate change happening, or global warming? Is global warming happening? And then the second big issue they took up was, is it human caused? And what we found, of course, is that the vast majorities of the scientific consensus on this issue, 95+%, is that yes, climate change, global warming is happening, and yes, it is human cause.
And according to Antonio Guterres of the UN, everybody must have heard this. We are in global boiling. The catchphrase. If you haven't heard that, that's what his speech was saying, because there is a quiet desperation. And then they also know that they're up against very powerful business people. And they've been doing it. What is this going to be, Antonio? The Council of Parties 28.
It's either, I can't remember. It's either
28 in the United Arab Emirates this year. That's a little bit ironic.
Yeah, the IPCC says that global warming is accelerating and will reach 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels around 2030, a full decade earlier than previously forecasted.
We're there.
And
Yeah.
here's what I think people should think about. We're talking about the disagreement among scientists. Here's the sad fact about the IPCC. First of all, it's partly a political organ. It's not a purely scientific organ. And part of that political process that's embedded in the IPCC, which of course comes from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, is a political vetting process that leaves us with the most common denominator. So you might think about the IPCC as being the baseline reality for the climate change episode that we're undergoing. You might find more serious work, I think, in the National Academies of Science or by the data published by NASA and NOAA in the United States, or the Hatchray Meteorological Research Facility in the UK. You're going to find a lot more detailed and substantive work outside the IPCC, specifically in select discipline areas like atmospheric science or marine oceanology or chemical oceanology or things like that. The IPCC is going to give you the general consensus on the totality of climate change.
And last year, they were
Go ahead.
working on, just real quick, last year they were working on remediation and financials for all the countries that have been affected by climate chaos, by the global warming, that never contributed to it. But the Western rich countries are supposed to be financially contributing. And I can't say that they were very angry. I mean, these were countries that were represented. Her name is Mia Motley. You ever get to look up Mia Motley? She's from a very small island nation. She is amazing, amazing advocate for the climate. That's all.
It snows in winter. Now, this is, I hate this, but it's my favorite. Congressman goes into the Senate, holds a snowball in his hand, denies global warming is real. Break down why that's wrong. It snows in winter. What are you guys talking about? It's not getting warmer. It still snows in winter. Look at this snowball.
Oh, Antonio, do you remember that guy?
I do remember Senator Inhofe.
Inhofe.
And a true embarrassment. Well, I don't know. I actually, as a historian myself, that the U.S. Senate actually is full of embarrassments. But this is, yes, one of the latest episodes, right? Senator Inhofe. So the reason why something like this is silly and obviously ought not be taken seriously is because what's happening outside at your house is not indicative of what's happening around the planet, right? And of course, it can't tell us what's happening today, right now, can't tell us anything about long-term trends. So it's completely not helpful to say, and what does that mean? He could have been holding up a snowball from one of these massive nor'easters that could have been a result of climate change. You know, so
embarrassment, Antonio.
Just saying you have snow in your hand.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think most of the people get how silly. Well, that's just it, isn't it? There is a demographic in the United States that doesn't actually get how ridiculously serious such an objection is, and that is in part why we've had such a struggle to respond.
But you can't put everybody down either, because people are poor. People are trying to get by. People don't have access to the kind of information that they need to understand why things might be happening to them. There's a whole contingency of people that are not in the know, that don't have that. And I'm not going to put them all down. I'm not going to just summarily paint them with a brush of, they're right-wing morons, because there's a lot of those. Trust me. I mean, I run into them all the time. I live in a red area. But it's access to proper information. But again, here you go. People are now being conditioned to hate academia and not trust institutions. So you're breaking down the population to not trust institutions of anything. And it's gotten worse during the Trump administration, much worse. And that's another problem. How do we help these people to understand? Tony, you got an idea here, Matt?
Well, I like how you said climate refers to long-term trends. And what a snowball tells me is that person is talking about weather, which fluctuates day in and day out. And there's a huge difference between weather and climate. When we talk about weather, we're talking about, you got a snowball. The weather is cold and snowy outside. That's the weather. If you want to talk about climate, you put your snowball down and we'll get back on the long-term trends, which is why I wanted to start with long-term trends, because
Okay.
that's, you can keep coming back to that, because weather is what's happening outside your window. Climate is long-term. And so I think that that's a good way to combat that, "Oh, it's snowing in
Yeah.
winter.
These
Wow."
senators, they should be short term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is an embarrassment anyway.
It's too late to fix it. So I referenced an article for you guys, and it was in the bibliography I put out over the weekend, which I'm going to start doing that more often. I referenced the article where they say it's not too late, right? But that article is from September 2021. It's September 2023 now. Is it too late?
Oof.
Because if they're saying it's too late to fix it, everyone goes, "Oh, well, we'll
Right.
ride it out." Let's all I'll start smoking cigarettes again. Let's go throw caution to the
You're
wind.
really asking, are we doomed? And
Is
what
it
do
too
we
late to
do?
fix or not? And
Yeah.
like, if not, can it be slowed down? And but how if that's a denialer or denial, what do you say? Denialer, denialist,
Denialist.
denier? If whatever, I didn't bother to look it up. I looked up a lot of stuff, but not that.
The
But if
scientific
they're
community doesn't think it's too late, totally.
yeah, okay,
Like Peter
so it's
Kalmus,
not too
like the
late.
activists, Michael Mann. There's a whole scientific community that doesn't think it's too late, that there might be solutions, but it's all political and it will be too late. And then there's the community that sees the real um, information that is terrifying. And I'm going to hand that over to Antonio to talk a little bit about, is it too late by the real hardcore data?
What I think is a more pertinent question for people is
Thank
to
you.
qualify this question. What does it mean to be too late?
Very good.
Okay. Is it too late for me to enjoy the type of climate I grew up in the early 90s? Oh, absolutely. We're not getting anything like that back. And obviously the whole host of decades of the sort of climate that my parents and your parents and their parents experienced is off the table for the rest of the time that humanity will be on this planet. And that is what the science says. So if that's the question, the answer is yes. The Holocene climate is forever gone to us, which is and should be horrifically sad, because it is the climate that human civilization was born into. Okay. It is the climate that was so gentle that it allowed us to predict the seasons and therefore the harvest. All of that is now gone. Okay. In terms of what our coastlines are going to look like, that too is gone. So you actually need to go down the list of things that you have. I like to call it an inventory list, and start checking off what's gone. So it's not just this question in total. Is it too late? I'm 30 years old. I expect to be here as this is all unfolding. And those type of questions to me are elusive. I want to know exactly what's on the table and what's being taken off, right? And so for much of the population, those big questions, a calm climate is off of the table. A settled shoreline is off of the table. And I would suspect, for the first time, I suspect for the first time since humans crossed the land bridge in Siberia over Alaska and entered into the North American continent, people as far south in North Carolina, in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida were breathing in wildfire smoke from the Great Boreal. So
Yeah.
we're quite a lot has been taken off the table.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is the more pertinent conversation.
Yeah, what are we living through? And I look at the activism. I interviewed Margaret Klein Solomon, who has a very, very good book out there on, and she was climate mobilization she ran, and she's big activist, and I am a believer in all of that, and that is what's happening as far as Peter Kalmus, the scientists, the NASA scientists. They're all out there, scientists warning, they're all out there trying to ring the bell to wake these politicians up to understand that we cannot keep burning fossil fuels. But there's a cadre of things we have to change. It's not just fossil fuels, it's the destruction of the planet. And, do we have the political will? Look at what's happening, and that's, I guess, why we get painted with the doomer brush, because when you look at the big picture, as Antonio said, it's not what it was. It's going to change. It's acclimation. But I don't like that it's too late either, because then that just takes away anybody's impetus to do something, even
But I don't
locally. I
think
always
that's
say
true.
local.
I
You
don't
don't
think
think so?
that's true. And the reason, and that's
Okay,
kind of,
because
it's
I
kind of the
talk
point that
locally.
I'm trying to push a little bit, is that I think a certain demographic might be predisposed to that disposition.
Okay.
Okay. I think that people who are saying that might be speaking overly broad. I don't have those sentiments, right? And that's why I'm more granular. What is it that we're losing? Instead of asking this question in total, which might lead someone to a defeatist attitude, I'm asking about the granular, because the opposite of that is, what then do we still have to say? What is still on the table? Is that worth saving? Asking this
Absolutely.
grand question, is it too late? And not really qualifying that might, I think, render a sort of cognitive dissonance for people. But also, I want people to think
Mm.
about it like this. Most people I know in my generation are having children. They are having children. And I would hope that if you can't feel a connection to the sixth mass extinction, that we are, in biblical terms, falling from Eden. We are losing biodiversity on a scale that can only be found in the Earth's deep past. Okay? If you can't connect to that, perhaps you can connect to your own posterity and realize the great crime that we are engaged in by not acting, no matter what stage of the crisis we are in.
Beautiful.
Yeah, an abundance of caution can turn into cowardice at some point. You really do have to stand up and do something at some point, right? And the whole, it's like this is what you get, and very well said, by the way. I don't want to
Very well said.
step over that, but this is what you get from politicians is, hey, come on, you guys don't understand. We understand. We're the ones who can fix it. Fix what? And we can't fix that. There's nothing that can be done. You don't understand. We're the ones who know that there's nothing that can be done. See how they just start twisting it, and then it gets boiled down to someone at the coffee shop or the bar or Thanksgiving saying it's too late to fix. That's what I heard, right? And so now they think they know everything, and I think that this has been a fantastic conversation in terms of how to combat this stuff. I like that we came upon the steel man argument. I didn't even mean for that to happen, but that seems to be the go-to response, right? It's like, no, yeah, I hear you. That's right, but that doesn't apply to this context, or there's more to it than that, or you need to get more specific or more granular. Um, I especially like the fact that you're right. All scientists don't agree, but what they do agree on is what matters, right? And it's like you're just using like somebody else's talking points, and that's the last thing you should be doing. Um, I found this, and I'll give you guys a chance to jump in, but I found this from theconversation.com, which I really like. They say we are a nonprofit independent news organization dedicated to unlocking the knowledge of experts for the public good. And I always recommend a comic book at the very end. I got the comic book recommendation from them too. Okay. And so it's all related, but we'll get there. I'm always willing to jump ahead of the comic book stuff, believe me, but we'll get there. Hold on. But this is what's called black and white thinking. The cognitive error that, and I've linked to an article about this, the cognitive error that makes people susceptible to climate change denial is what psychologists call black and white thinking. This is when we put the world into binary circumstances that makes it incredibly simplified. So we can simply pass or fail an argument versus looking for nuance, looking in the gray areas, right? And that's what we've been doing is like I throw out the basics, it snows in winter, and then we start talking about that's weather, not climate. Climate is long-term trends. Now we can just start talking about the long-term trends and not that snowball melting in your hand, right? This is why I wanted to have this specific conversation, because I want people to know that what's being put out there as an argument is just the simplest terms to make it easy on themselves. And you can take sympathy on that, or you can go in and attack whatever you want. But it's an easy thing to reverse and argue. It's not even really arguing. You're just informing them of what they're leaving out. But are there any other specific ways or any other things people should know about getting involved in the solutions and combating climate denial and global warming denial?
Educate yourself by watching
Environmental
people
Coffee
that,
House.
well, environmental coffee house, but really people that have degrees, that are climate scientists, that publish in journals if you want to learn about it, or read the conversation. Phys.org. There are a lot of good places that will take the research and will then articulate it for you so you can understand it. So the more you learn, the more you reach one, teach one, reach one, the old saying. And that's what I do. And then the only other thing I would say is local. If you can get involved in something local, it trickles up. That when you think about the politics the way it is today, and you think about it's overwhelming. But if you look at go to your local board meeting, get involved in something. You see the right, they've been getting involved in school boards, get involved in the planning board. Stop things from being built that aren't going to be beneficial for the community.
One thing that I would advise people in their personal lives when they're talking to their neighbors, especially as we start to see our social systems and services challenged by climate stress and the vulnerability that we'll all be increasingly exposed to, is to try to nurture and develop relationships with people, and particularly on this issue. What Matt was saying earlier, I think it's important not to punch people in the face when you're having this conversation. It's important not to debate people, but to engage in dialogue, to speak with them, to hear them, and not just try to bring out a gotcha, because it turns people off. And this is an issue where we really do have to be turning people on. And for each and every one of us, we're going to have to find a way to hear things that we think are ridiculous and silly, like, oh, it snowed yesterday, so it's not. But we're going to have to find it within ourselves to restrain, because is that someone that we might be able to reach out to? I'll give you this. The last Republican debate gave me pause for a little hope, just a little hope. Vivek Ramaswamy, the really cool younger guy on stage, was really grabbing a lot of attention. He took on this question of climate change head on, and he was just the embodiment of the Republican machine talking points. And my God, at least from my perspective and from the commentaries I read afterwards, he was being booed by the Republican audience. That really hit home in a lot of ways.
Yeah, small
Wow.
government just means privatization. So who do you
Hmm.
think has bought the politicians, right? The corporations who are affecting uh, the environment and causing global warming. Um, there was there was an example. I love this example. They say another point of denial is that the global warming is not happening in a straight line. That
Oh,
sometimes it
linear,
dips. Yeah.
exponential.
Check this out.
Okay.
Expecting a straight line in a variable world. If global temperatures are not increasing at perfectly consistent rate, there is no such thing as global warming. So
Oh,
then they compare it to this
so
Apple
bad.
stocks price, right?
Oh,
Now, if your Apple stock isn't going in a straight line, do you dump the stock? Right? Do you sell? No. So I really do appreciate this comparison. This is from theconversation.com. It kind of looks the same, right? Like there's ups and downs, but it just keeps going up, and that's really what matters, right? At the end of the day.
yes.
Um, so there you go. That's just another thing that another arrow in your quiver for when these arguments come up. You can always fall back on that, which I thought that was pretty clever. And so I want to give you guys another opportunity. Is there anything that we're leaving out or forgetting
Oh
before
my
we wrap
God.
it up?
I could go on for an hour.
Well, I know, but in the
We're not
spirit
going to
of,
do that. In the
giving people
spirit,
just enough to
I'm happy that you asked us to be here. And
oh, sure.
I'm happy. I don't know if I have much more to offer. I mean, there's a lot to discuss. Be kind,
Yeah.
be kind, and the hate. Try to eliminate hate, because if there is any chance that anybody's gonna fix anything, we have to get out of that whole gotcha, hating, negative mindset.
Yeah,
It's
win
very
people
hard.
over. Don't just
Hmm.
write them off. Win them over. And then, if you can't win them over, maybe you gave them something to think about,
Maybe.
So don't
Or learn
expect the
from them.
immediate success. Yeah,
I
yeah,
learn
that too.
from them. I read comment sections. I learn from all of these people that are saying these things, and then it formulates how I can then deal with it going forward.
So we've discussed the long-term trends. We've given people resources to fall back on. We've given them arguments for some of the more popular talking points. So we're using their talking points to figure out how to keep the conversation going. I think this is very productive. I want to thank everyone
Yes.
for tuning in. Sandy, you know this, and Tony, you may not. When we're not talking about this stuff or political media, we're talking about art and comic books. I'm normally drawing, and this was so refreshing to be able to just sit here and listen and watch people when they talk instead of looking down drawing. But I never let my guests go without recommending a comic book to them. Do you read comic books, Antonio?
I don't read comic books, but I am big in high fantasy and lore, if
Oh,
that counts.
I mean, no, yeah, total geek. Oh, I
Are you a
could
geek?
sense
Somebody
that.
that I
Yeah,
didn't know?
could sense that.
Oh,
What about
please
you,
tell
Sandy? Have
us.
you ever read comics at all? I've
Oh,
been
a long
recommending
time
so
ago.
many. You've never read any of the ones
Well, a long
I've
time
ever.
ago, but actually, the guy that runs our Facebook page, Jonathan O, is a phenomenal comic artist, but he puts all his stuff on Deviant Art.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
he did a whole environmental coffee house thing. He called it Jesus Crisis. And I did a video on it, but I should make a new one. So actually, but I don't really, read comic books. I listen to what you do, and it's opened a new world for me because obviously I'm not into it. But I don't turn it out. I don't tune it down.
Okay,
And I
well,
do have a whole bookshelf behind me of books called Doomer Humor, and they're all comics. I got it. They're vintage. They're all comics.
that sounds really cool. This might actually um, go well with those books. We'll
I'm
see.
going to send you a picture of them.
This book is called Here by Richard McGuire. It's from 2014. Now check this out. I know that a lot of the people I'm recommending comics to haven't read comics, so I always try and give you something accessible.
Okay.
Always try and give you one book. You don't have to buy. You don't have to start collecting monthly or anything. This isn't going to break the bank. And I want to show people what can be done with the medium. And this is a great example of what can be done with the medium. Um, as its title suggests, Here is a graphic novel that is set in a single place, the living room of the author's childhood home. In distinct contrast to flying cameras of disaster films, our perspective on this space never moves. Spatially, the graphic novel remains rooted to the familiar human scale of a normal front room of a house. However, while this space never changes, McGuire uses timestamps and floating panels to show images of the same place as it has changed through billions of years.
Oh, wow.
So it's not a lot of dialogue. You're not going to have to, how do I read this thing? You just look
Yeah.
at it, right? They go past, present, and future after humans. So when water levels rise, you see water coming in through the windows of this, right?
Wow.
It's very interesting. And the timestamps will show you the exact same location, but the house is no longer there, but you're still in that room. So it's really interesting. It
Okay.
visually, anyone could enjoy it. You don't have to be a comics fan. And this comic and the way the story goes from first page to last page, without leaving that line, but skips around, kind of reminded me of that graph we just looked of Apple stock and global war. You know what I mean? Like it starts here and ends here, but it goes to a whole bunch of different places in the meanwhile. So I thought it was appropriate to recommend to you guys for this
Thanks.
conversation. It does have to do with global warming and that kind of
gonna
stuff,
pick
but
it
it
up.
starts way back before any of that. So it's very well researched
So
stuff.
Tony, it's pre-baseline. Maybe it's back. Yeah, it's back. This sounds like it's right up your alley too.
Yeah, it's called Here
Yeah.
by Richard McGuire. It's from 2014, so you can totally find it. Anyway,
Totally.
that's
Well,
what I got
thank
for you
you.
guys. Yeah, I hope you
Thank
check
you
it
to
out.
the
And if you
chat,
do,
too. Thank you.
yes, thank you for the chat. Thank you to both chats. Now, I want to say this. We're simulcasting. So I want everyone in my chat to make sure that you find the Environmental Coffee House link in the description of this video and subscribe to their channel. Likewise, I invite
My
everyone
people.
from Environmental Coffee House to come on over here and subscribe to the Letterhack because we do all kinds of stuff like this. I love when chats collide and when communities collide on YouTube.
Yeah,
It's
totally
very
different
cool.
community, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's like Sandy and I have been following each other for a while, so just
Well,
makes
since I
sense that we
followed you
should
since you
bring
started.
everyone. We should bring everyone over
Yeah.
together, yeah, and help each
Yeah.
other grow. Because I want to start doing more of these collaborations. I'd love to have you both back. I'd love to have everyone from Environmental Coffee House come on. So next time a topic comes up, if you want to recommend it to me, feel free, and I'll figure out the schedule. Otherwise, I'll hit you up. But
Terrific.
is there anything you want to plug? What do you got coming up on Environmental Coffee House?
Tomorrow night, I'm doing a show on something that has to do with Antarctica.
Okay.
And Tony will be back, and he does his State of the Planet with us as a team, right? And we're going to do that soon. But because Nick is so busy, we can't do it yet. Friday night is with Jennifer. We do our Friday night show as the biosphere dissolves, or whatever we title it. And there's a lot of research we do for that one. Entertainment. Tony?
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely great being on here, being able to talk about climate change and climate denial and the politics of climate change with this illustrious group of people. So I've absolutely enjoyed my time. Thanks very much, Matt.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank everyone. I really enjoyed this. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. I'll be back here tomorrow night with a premiere video, and then I'll be back here with another live interview on Wednesday. We got a lot going on around here. It's very fun. So I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
The letter hack. Oh my gosh.